He opened the vault expecting sparkle, not heartbreak. A treasure chest built on trust, guarded by silence, hiding secrets no husband should ever stumble across. Diamonds, heirlooms, shimmering jewels of love. Yes, they were there. But so was something else. Something that didn't belong among the glitter. Papers. Legal papers. Cold, clinical, drafted divorce documents folded neatly beside the very rings that had once symbolized eternal love. Now ask yourself, what kind of marriage keeps its escape plan tucked right next to its vows? Picture this. Prince Harry, a man born into centuries of tradition, finally finding the woman he thought was his refuge. For years, he defended her against the storm, against his family, against the press, against the very institution that raised him. He left everything behind for her. He built his life, his children's lives, his legacy around her. And then, one ordinary day, he opened a door never meant for him. A vault. A private sanctuary. And in that vault, the truth waited. Not spoken, not shouted, but hidden in silence. Have you ever wondered how it feels to realize that love might have been a transaction, that loyalty might have been conditional, that the vows you clung to might have been rehearsed lines? Because that's the story we're unraveling here. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's pause for a moment. We know Meghan Markle as the glamorous Duchess, the woman who stepped onto the royal stage and rewrote the script. She wore the tiaras, flaunted the diamonds, and gave interviews dripping with claims of authenticity. But authenticity doesn't leave a drafted exit plan beside its most sacred symbols. Why would she hide divorce papers in a jewelry vault of all places? A vault is supposed to symbolize permanence, security, wealth preserved for generations. What irony, what poetic cruelty. That tucked alongside those timeless jewels lay documents designed to dissolve everything she once promised to hold on to forever. Think about the weight of that discovery. Jewelry is deeply emotional. A wedding ring isn't just a circle of gold. It's the endless loop of trust. An heirloom diamond isn't just sparkle. It's the continuation of family bloodlines. To place a divorce draft beside them is almost symbolic mockery. It's saying, this love is beautiful, but temporary. This promise shines, but only until I decide otherwise. And Harry, standing there in that moment, must have felt the world tilt under his feet. Can you imagine his heart pounding, his breath catching, as he realized that his wife might have been planning her exit long before the world suspected cracks? Now, why does this matter? Why should we care about what was found in Meghan Markle's jewelry vault? Because it isn't just about a marriage. It's about betrayal at the highest level. It's about the fairy tale we were sold versus the nightmare behind the curtain. It's about trust shattered, not just between a man and a woman, but between a prince and the very foundation of his life choices. The timing of this story is everything. Right now, whispers of estrangement between Harry and Meghan ripple louder than ever. Rumors of separate lives, conflicting projects, private feuds. And this vault discovery feels like the missing puzzle piece. The receipts, quite literally, hiding in plain sight. Ask yourself this. Have you ever looked back on a relationship and wondered if the other person had one foot out the door from the start? Imagine the humiliation, the sting of knowing that your deepest commitment was matched with someone else's backup plan. That's not just betrayal. That's annihilation of trust. Harry wasn't just betrayed as a husband. He was betrayed as a man who gave up everything for someone who may have already been calculating her way out. The imagery writes itself. Diamonds sparkling under the light. Velvet boxes holding rings of eternal promise. And tucked between them, the sterile black and white of a legal draft. Two worlds colliding. One of romance, tradition, and eternal love. The other of cold legalese, signatures, and finality. It's like finding a poison pill inside a box of chocolates, hidden, but waiting to be discovered. And what does it say about Meghan's mindset? To draft those papers, to tuck them away, to place them in that specific spot. That's not an accident. That's intentional. Jewelry vaults aren't cluttered desks where papers are misplaced. They're curated spaces where only the most valuable, irreplaceable items belong. By hiding divorce papers there, Meghan tied the two together: love and escape, commitment and exit, vows and betrayal. Was it a subconscious admission? Or was it a calculated statement? That's the haunting question. Let's dive deeper into the psychology. Meghan Markle is a woman who has always been strategic. From her rise in Hollywood to her entry into the royal family, she's played the long game. Some call it ambition, others manipulation. But one thing's certain, nothing she does is without thought. So why place those documents beside wedding jewels? Could it be that, for her, the jewelry and the papers were two sides of the same coin? One to dazzle the world, the other to ensure she never lost control? Think about that for a second. Isn't it chilling? Now, let's talk about Harry's perspective. This is a man who saw jewelry as sacred. His mother's diamonds, his grandmother's tiaras, his wife's engagement ring. All these pieces carry weight far beyond material value. To him, they were threads of family, love, and memory. And to discover them stored next to documents designed to cut those threads must have been like a knife to the chest. Betrayal is one thing, but betrayal layered with symbolism? That's unbearable. Here's where the contradictions burn brightest. Meghan's public persona has always been about fighting for love, defying the odds, surviving the cruelty of the palace machine. Yet in private, she apparently prepared the very documents that would sever her from the man she claimed to stand beside against the world. Is that courage? Or is it cold calculation? Is it foresight? Or is it deception? Viewers, I have to ask, if you were Harry, how would you ever look at your wedding ring again? And yet, this vault discovery is not just about Meghan and Harry. It's about the ripple effect. If Harry told his family what he found, how would Charles react? How would William? Imagine the fury, the smugness, the pain of knowing they had warned him. And this discovery proved them right. It's more than a marital issue, it's a royal crisis. A prince betrayed, a family's fears confirmed, and a public image on the brink of collapse. The timing of this reveal couldn't be more critical. As cracks appear in their joint ventures, as whispers grow about separate paths, this vault story adds fuel to the fire. Because if Meghan was planning her exit from the start, what does that make the past years of drama? Were they genuine struggles of a couple fighting the world, or carefully orchestrated steps of a woman walking toward her freedom? Now, let's not forget the theatrical irony. Meghan, who fought tooth and nail for her royal wedding, who basked in the global spotlight, who presented the image of devotion, may have been secretly rehearsing a very different ending. The vault discovery is the ultimate plot twist. It turns a love story into a thriller. And thrillers, unlike fairy tales, don't end with happily ever after. They end with revelations that leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. And here's the real sting. The vault wasn't just about jewels. It was about memories, about legacy. And now, those memories are stained, forever tainted. Because once you know the divorce papers were hidden there, every diamond looks different. Every ring feels heavier. Every jewel whispers betrayal. But what if those papers weren't the only secret in that vault? What if this was just the beginning of Harry's horrifying discovery? Because once you've found one lie hidden among treasures, you start to wonder, what else is buried in the shadows? And that's where the story takes a darker, even more devastating turn. The vault. Silent. Cold. Unyielding. It stood there like a sentry guarding not just treasures, but truths. And here's the shocking reality. This was a vault nobody was ever supposed to open. Not Harry, not the press, not the curious public. It wasn't just about locks and keys. It was about secrets deliberately buried in darkness. And yet, one day, by chance or by fate, Prince Harry placed his hand on that handle. He expected to see glittering heirlooms, symbols of legacy and love. Instead, he stumbled into a chamber of contradiction. But let's slow down. Let's walk into that moment with him. Can you picture it? The room is quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. The vault door creaks open, heavy with secrets. Inside, velvet boxes, polished wood cases, platinum locks clicking open with delicate precision. The glow of diamonds refracts in the dim light, scattering little rainbows across the walls. Jewelry that has seen royal banquets, private dinners, red carpets. Each piece whispering stories of love, ambition, appearances. At first glance, it's dazzling, almost distracting. And then, something out of place. Something paper-thin in a world of metal and stone. That's the horror of it. The vault wasn't meant to betray Meghan. It wasn't meant to betray Harry. But it did. Now let's ask, why does a vault matter? Why should we dwell on a locked box of jewels? Because vaults are metaphors. They're built to store the untouchable, to keep sacred what must never be lost. Families hide their legacies in them. Couples lock their future symbols away in velvet folds. A vault isn't clutter. It isn't random. Everything inside is deliberate. And if divorce papers found their way into such a space, that's not chance. That's choice. That's intention. Let's step back in time. Meghan Markle, freshly married into royalty, suddenly finds herself with access to a vault that few would ever glimpse. Imagine the rush of power. Imagine the contrast, from Hollywood scripts to royal treasures, from costume jewelry to diamonds steeped in centuries of history. For Meghan, the vault wasn't just a container. It was a statement. She had arrived. And yet, behind the glitter lay her contingency plan. Does that chill you? Because it should. Who tucks a legal escape hatch next to the very symbols of devotion? And Harry, he wasn't supposed to see this. That's the cruelest twist. He wasn't snooping. He wasn't prying. He was simply existing in a house filled with shadows. But vaults have a way of revealing more than they protect. So when Harry's eyes landed on that misplaced folder, he wasn't just looking at paper. He was looking at betrayal materialized. And betrayal always feels heavier when it's hidden in plain sight. Let's think about the psychology of forbidden spaces. Humans are drawn to them. What's behind the locked door? What's beneath the sealed box? And yet, when you finally open it, the truth rarely matches the anticipation. Often, it's worse. The anticipation builds a myth, but the reveal destroys it. Harry expected to find beauty preserved. He found beauty desecrated. And here's the dramatic irony. Meghan likely thought the vault was the safest place to keep her secrets. But sometimes the safest place is the most dangerous, because when secrets sit beside symbols, they scream louder. Let's ground this in royal tradition. For centuries, vaults have safeguarded the crown jewels, artifacts of empires, priceless heirlooms passed from monarch to monarch. These vaults are more than storage. They're chapters of history encased in steel. And here, Meghan had her own vault, filled with her personal narrative. Only, this narrative wasn't about legacy. It was about options. A sparkling facade on one side, a legal safety net on the other. Ask yourself, does this sound like a woman swept up in love? Or a woman calculating her next move? The irony deepens. Meghan fought for the symbolism of jewelry. Remember how much emphasis was placed on her engagement ring? Designed with Diana's diamonds, a physical link to Harry's late mother. The world swooned. The headlines praised. Meghan wore that ring as though it anchored her place in royal history. And yet, tucked beside it were papers drafted to sever that very tie. What does that tell us about her true intentions? Isn't it almost poetic? Diamonds, the hardest substance on earth, sitting beside fragile papers that could break an entire marriage. Now let's pause and turn to you, the viewer. If you were Harry, standing there in front of that vault, how would you react? Anger? Shock? Heartbreak? Or a strange numbness? The kind that comes when betrayal feels too vast to comprehend? The truth is, Harry probably felt all of it. His mind racing, his heart hammering, his breath short. Because this wasn't just a secret. It was the rewriting of his entire marriage story. And let's not forget the element of danger here. Vaults imply ownership, control, authority. By opening that vault, Harry didn't just discover papers. He trespassed into Meghan's world of power. Did she know he opened it? Did she plan for him to find it? Or was this an accident, a slip, the unraveling of a perfectly crafted performance? That's the mystery we have to sit with. But what makes this even more unsettling is the deliberate positioning. The papers weren't hidden in a drawer. They weren't stuffed into a folder in some office. They were placed beside jewels. Why? Was Meghan symbolically linking her marriage to wealth and status? Was she reducing love to a contract and jewels to props? Or was she simply careless, assuming Harry would never dare to enter? Either way, the outcome was the same. A prince discovered his wife's most devastating secret in the one place designed to dazzle him with loyalty. And this is where the story twists further. Because Harry's discovery wasn't just shocking, it was confirming. Whispers had swirled for years. Was Meghan in it for love or strategy? Was the marriage built on devotion or calculation? And there, in the silence of that vault, Harry found his answer. Divorce papers don't lie. They wait. They linger. They testify. And in that moment, they testified louder than any diamond ever could. So what did Harry do? Did he close the vault and pretend he never saw it? Did he confront Meghan with trembling words? Did he crumble in private, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him? We don't know every detail, but we know this. The vault was never supposed to open, and once it did, nothing could ever be the same again. Because the most haunting part wasn't what Harry saw. It was the realization that this discovery was only the beginning. If divorce papers could hide among jewels, what else could be hiding in the shadows of this marriage? And what Harry would uncover next would go far beyond paper and rings. It would strike at the very core of the love story the world thought it knew. A wedding ring, a simple circle of gold. To most, it's a symbol of eternity, unbreakable, unending, pure. To Harry, it was his tether to Meghan, his silent vow that despite the storms, despite the scrutiny, despite the relentless noise of the press and the palace, he would stand by her. That ring, that jewelry, was meant to embody permanence. But what happens when permanence sits beside a document designed to end it all? What happens when the symbols of love are forced to share space with the symbols of lies? That's the nightmare Harry faced when he opened that vault. Let's pause here. Imagine yourself finding something like this. You open a box expecting mementos of love, treasures that remind you of better times. But instead, tucked neatly alongside them, you find paperwork designed to dissolve your very marriage. Can you imagine the emotional violence of that moment? The confusion? The rage? The irony? It's like reading a love letter and finding a betrayal hidden in the margins. And for Harry, those symbols of love he had clung to suddenly twisted into a cruel joke. Let's break it down. Jewelry isn't just decoration, it's communication. Meghan knew this. Every time she wore Diana's diamonds, it was a statement. Every time she showed off her engagement ring, it was a reminder of her link to the late Princess of Wales, and by extension, Harry's undying devotion. Jewelry speaks louder than words in the world of royalty. It whispers about loyalty, history, and power. But what happens when those jewels are paired with divorce papers? Suddenly, the jewelry doesn't look like symbols of commitment. They look like props in a carefully staged performance. Think about Meghan's engagement ring. Designed by Harry himself, it included stones from Diana's personal collection. He wanted his mother to be a part of their journey. He wanted permanence. But imagine standing there in that vault, looking at that same ring beside papers marked with legal separation clauses. What does that say? Was the ring ever about love, or was it about optics? Was the marriage about eternal union, or was it about strategy? These are the haunting questions Harry must have asked himself in that very moment. And let's talk irony. The word eternity is often used when speaking of diamonds. Diamonds are forever, they say. But beside those diamonds sat pages that could erase forever with the stroke of a pen. Doesn't that make you wonder, was the love story ever real? Or was it a calculated contract from the beginning? The contradiction is so sharp it cuts deeper than any sword. Jewelry says, I'm here to stay. Divorce papers say, I'm preparing to leave. Together, they don't make sense, unless betrayal was always part of the plan. Now let's step into Harry's mind. Picture him lifting the velvet lid of a jewelry box, expecting to see the sparkle that once made his heart race. Instead, his eyes dart to the folded papers, his breath hitching, his fingers trembling. The very objects he once saw as proof of Meghan's loyalty now mocked him. The ring he gave her, symbol of their vows, now sat inches away from the proof she'd thought about ending it all. Isn't that the cruelest irony of all? To be mocked not by enemies, not by strangers, but by the very symbols you once thought were sacred. Ask yourself, how would you ever look at your wedding ring again? Could you slip it on your finger without feeling the sting of those papers? Could you look at your spouse wearing diamonds without wondering what else they've hidden? Jewelry is supposed to strengthen bonds, but in Harry's case, it shattered them. Every sparkle became a question mark. Every piece a silent accusation. And let's not ignore Meghan's intentions here. Was placing those papers beside the jewels deliberate? Was it symbolic? Jewelry vaults aren't places for random storage. They're carefully curated. So if those papers ended up there, someone placed them with intent. Was it Meghan's way of keeping her options close? Was it her silent reminder that while the world saw devotion, she was already planning for a different ending? That symbolism cannot be ignored. Love on one side, betrayal on the other. And she put them together. This is where contradiction burns brightest. Meghan publicly flaunted jewelry as proof of her devotion. The cameras loved it. Every sparkle became a headline. Every ring became a fairy tale image. But behind closed doors, the same jewelry sat alongside the ultimate betrayal. To the world, jewelry was love. To Harry, jewelry became lies. Can you feel the sting of that reversal? It's devastating. Let's add another layer. Think of Diana. Harry designed Meghan's ring using his mother's diamonds because he wanted Meghan to feel Diana's presence in their union. He wanted to weave Meghan into the fabric of his mother's memory. But now what does that mean? Diana's jewels, meant to unite, were sitting beside documents meant to divide. That's more than betrayal. That's desecration of memory. It's as though the very love Diana represented was being mocked, reduced to just another pawn in Meghan's game. And the emotional weight of this can't be overstated. Jewelry is one of the few things in life that outlives us. Rings, necklaces, heirlooms, they pass from one generation to the next. They outlast wars, scandals, and even monarchies. But now, those timeless jewels are forever tainted for Harry. Because once you know betrayal is stored alongside them, every glance at their sparkle brings back the memory of that paper. Forever doesn't look so beautiful anymore. It looks like a lie carved into gold. Let's turn this back to you. Imagine you're holding your grandmother's ring, a family heirloom, something meant to represent devotion and legacy. And then you discover that, tucked beside it, your spouse has hidden a prenup, or worse, a drafted divorce. Wouldn't the ring feel different in your hand? Wouldn't the sparkle sting your eyes? That's the torment Harry is living through. His most cherished symbols of love are now forever contaminated by the symbols of betrayal. And here's where it gets darker. Jewelry is meant to be displayed, flaunted, adored. Divorce papers are meant to be hidden until the moment they're used. By putting them together, Meghan blurred the line between public devotion and private deception. She made them one and the same. And once Harry saw that, he couldn't unsee it. The jewels lost their meaning. The papers gained too much. And yet, the worst wasn't even the papers themselves. It was the detail, the date, that made Harry's blood run cold. Because when he leaned closer, eyes wide, heart pounding, he realized that these papers weren't new. They weren't recent. They weren't drafted in response to recent cracks. No, they were older, far older than he could have imagined. Which meant one terrifying thing. Meghan's exit plan might have existed from the very beginning. Drafted divorce papers. The very phrase alone is enough to send chills down your spine. Cold, calculated words etched on lifeless sheets of paper, designed not to unite, but to sever, not to heal, but to end. And there they were, staring Harry in the face from inside that vault. He expected to see jewels, treasures, maybe even sentimental notes tucked away. But instead, he found the silent, sterile language of lawyers and legal contracts. And that moment, oh, that moment, was like a dagger to his heart. Let's start with the shock of recognition. Harry isn't a stranger to legal documents. He's dealt with lawyers his entire life. Royal charters, security disputes, lawsuits against tabloids. He knows the layout, the tone, the sterile formatting. So when his eyes fell on those papers, he didn't need to read every word to understand what they were. The headings, the clauses, the unmistakable structure. It screamed divorce. And not just a casual thought, not just scribbled notes. This was drafted, formal, prepared, ready, waiting. Can you imagine that wave of realization crashing over him? Now picture this. Harry picks up the papers with trembling hands. The weight feels heavier than gold, heavier than any jewel in the vault. His mind races. His heart pounds. He doesn't even need to read the details to know what they represent. Betrayal. But he does read them, and the words burn. Words like petition, dissolution, custody. Cold, heartless words. Words designed to dismantle vows, split families, destroy trust. For a man who gave up his kingdom for love, finding these words hidden by the woman he sacrificed everything for must have been unbearable. Let's pause here. Divorce papers don't just appear out of nowhere. Someone commissions them. Someone sits down with a lawyer. Someone has conversations, drafts, edits, revisions. These weren't accidental. They weren't hypothetical musings scribbled in a diary. They were typed, formatted, official in tone. That means Meghan didn't just think about leaving. She planned for it. She prepared for it. And she placed those plans beside the very jewels that symbolized staying forever. Isn't that the cruelest irony? Think about it. A wedding ring symbolizes permanence. A diamond necklace symbolizes commitment. A tiara symbolizes belonging. But those papers symbolize the opposite: impermanence, exit, rejection. For them to sit together in one vault is like fire and ice, like love and hate, like forever and never colliding in one tiny space. Can you imagine Harry's head spinning as he took it all in? Now let's get personal. Harry has always been emotional, impulsive, driven by heart over protocol. That's why he fled the palace for Meghan. That's why he defended her, stood against his own blood, chose exile over tradition. And now, standing in front of those papers, his entire narrative shattered. The woman he defended at all costs may have had her own escape plan ready before the ink on their vows was even dry. That realization isn't just betrayal. It's humiliation. It's devastation. It's the crumbling of everything he believed in. Let's ask a question. How long had those papers been sitting there? Days? Months? Years? The truth is terrifying because Harry knew the answer was written on them. The date. The draft date. He leans closer, eyes scanning the header. And there it is, the date that changes everything. The papers weren't recent. They weren't drawn up after the big fights, the public drama, the Netflix controversies. No, they were old. They had been drafted shockingly early in the marriage, maybe even before the cracks appeared. Which means Meghan may have planned her exit from the very start. Does that not send shivers down your spine? Let's explore the symbolism here. Drafted divorce papers mean she was rehearsing her freedom while rehearsing her vows. Practicing her goodbye while practicing her I do. That's not just betrayal, it's premeditation. It suggests that the fairy tale wedding wasn't about forever, but about optics, power, leverage. And Harry, the hopeless romantic, was the unwitting pawn in a larger strategy. Do you feel the sting of that contradiction? It's enough to break even the strongest heart. And what about the content? We don't need the exact words to know what they contained. Clauses about financial settlements, custody of children, division of property. Perhaps even mentions of titles, security, reputation. Imagine Harry reading words about custody, custody of Archie, custody of Lilibet, long before their family was even stable. Imagine realizing your wife had already imagined a world where your children weren't under the same roof as you. That isn't just betrayal. That's cruelty of the highest order. And then comes the humiliation. Imagine Harry thinking back to every public appearance, every smile, every romantic gesture. Meghan wearing his mother's diamonds on her hand. Meghan holding his hand during interviews. Meghan looking into his eyes during the wedding vows. All while papers like these existed. Was it all a performance? Was the love real, or was it theater? The papers whispered the cruelest answer. But let's not forget, the worst wasn't just the content. It was the timing. The date on those papers was like a ticking bomb. It revealed that Meghan's doubts, her plans, her exit strategy weren't sudden. They weren't reactions to struggles. They were proactive, preemptive, calculated. She didn't just stumble into doubt. She walked into marriage with an escape route already mapped out. Can you imagine the rage Harry must have felt in that moment? Rage at Meghan, rage at himself, rage at the entire story he thought was his truth. And this raises a chilling question. If Meghan had papers drafted early on, what does that say about her intentions from the start? Was the marriage a love story, or was it a stepping stone? Was Harry her soulmate, or her strategy? And if it was strategy, what was the endgame? Fame? Influence? Financial power? Because love doesn't draft divorce papers beside wedding rings. Love doesn't hide an exit plan in the same vault as eternal vows. Here's the twist. As shocking as the discovery was, Harry couldn't stop reading. He scanned every clause, every phrase, his mind spinning, his heart breaking. And then his eyes caught something else. Something more. A detail in those papers that went beyond betrayal. A reference to someone else. A name. A lawyer, perhaps. A confidant. Another figure who had been involved in drafting Meghan's potential freedom. Which meant Meghan hadn't just thought about leaving. She'd brought someone else into the plan. And that's where the story spirals even darker. Because Harry wasn't just betrayed by Meghan in that vault. He was betrayed by the fact that someone else knew her plan. Someone else had helped her prepare her escape. And the question that tore at Harry's heart was this. If Meghan could share her secret with them, why not with him? The date. That was the detail that made Harry's blood run cold. Not the jewels, not the papers, not even the clauses about custody or settlement. It was the date printed in black ink at the top of that document. A date that carried weight heavier than any diamond in that vault. A date that whispered one devastating truth. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment draft. This wasn't a reaction to fights, controversies, or late-stage cracks in their relationship. No, this was older, much older. And once Harry's eyes locked onto it, the ground beneath him gave way. Picture him there, his hands trembling, the papers rustling in the silence of that vault, his heart pounding as his eyes scan the top corner. And then he freezes. Because the date wasn't from recent months. It wasn't even from the years when the marriage publicly began to falter. No, this draft was shockingly close to their wedding. So close it suggested that Meghan may have been preparing her exit before she had even fully stepped into her role as Harry's wife. Can you imagine the devastation of realizing that what you thought was the happiest chapter of your life might have been shadowed by an escape plan? Let's unpack the horror of that realization. A wedding is supposed to be a new beginning, a moment of hope, a vow of forever. Harry walked down that aisle with his heart on his sleeve, his soul bared, believing he had finally found someone who would love him for who he was. Not for his title, not for his fortune, but for himself. And yet, tucked away in that vault, the date on those divorce papers told him otherwise. It told him that while he was pledging his life to Meghan, she may have already been planning for a future without him. Isn't that the cruelest contradiction imaginable? The timing matters because it reframes the entire story. If the papers had been recent, drafted during known conflicts or after explosive fights, Harry might have been able to rationalize them as heat-of-the-moment precautions. Hurtful, yes, but understandable in the context of turmoil. But an early date? That's not reaction. That's foresight. That's calculation. That's walking into marriage with one foot already pointing toward the door. Ask yourself, would you ever be able to trust again after discovering that? And here's where the pain deepens. Think back to Harry's wedding day. The global spectacle, the millions watching, the vows, the kiss, the cheering crowds. Harry stood there, looking into Meghan's eyes, believing he was sealing his forever. But what if, at that very moment, there was already a draft tucked away in a lawyer's folder? What if while the world swooned over a fairy tale, Meghan had already considered the ending? That thought alone must have made Harry's stomach turn. Was his marriage ever a love story? Or was it a production with a script already prepared for the finale? Now, think about the psychology of dates. Dates anchor memories. They remind us of birthdays, anniversaries, milestones. For Harry, the date on those papers wasn't just ink. It was betrayal with a timestamp. It proved intent. It proved that Meghan's doubts didn't bloom later. They sprouted at the very start. And once he saw that, every memory shifted. Every kiss, every public smile, every whispered promise suddenly felt like a scene from a play, a performance. Because if she was already drafting an exit, how could the love have been pure? Let's not overlook the cruelty of the symbolism here. Harry designed Meghan's engagement ring with Diana's diamonds. He wanted his mother's spirit woven into their love story. That was his way of anchoring Meghan into the permanence of his heart. And yet, the date on those papers suggested impermanence from the start. Diana's diamonds symbolized forever. The divorce papers symbolized expiration. To place them side by side wasn't just careless, it was sacrilegious. It desecrated Diana's memory, mocked Harry's devotion, and twisted the meaning of forever into a cruel joke. Now let's turn this to you. Imagine standing in front of the person you love, exchanging vows, holding their hand, believing in their promises. And then, years later, you discover they had already planned their exit while you were still caught up in the magic. How would you ever reconcile that? Would every anniversary suddenly feel hollow? Would every photo from your wedding day make you sick? That's the torment Harry faced. His wedding wasn't just haunted by public criticism. It was haunted by the hidden shadow of those papers. The date also raises another terrifying question. Who knew? Divorce papers don't draft themselves. Lawyers were involved. Which means, while Harry was celebrating his new life, there were already legal conversations happening in the background. Someone else, perhaps multiple people, were aware of Meghan's doubts before Harry ever was. That's not just betrayal. That's humiliation on a scale few could endure. Because betrayal in private hurts. But betrayal that involves outsiders? That crushes. And let's not forget the context. Around that time, Meghan was presenting herself as a devoted bride, a victim of royal coldness, a woman in love fighting for her happiness. The press was charmed. The public was divided. But behind closed doors, if these papers existed, then the story she presented to the world was incomplete at best and deceptive at worst. She wore symbols of loyalty in public while privately drafting symbols of escape. That contradiction is staggering. Harry's mind must have raced back through time, replaying every moment with a new, darker lens. Their honeymoon, their early interviews, Meghan's glowing speeches about love conquering all of it suddenly felt tainted. Because once you know the exit plan existed from the start, every gesture feels rehearsed. Every word feels suspect. Every kiss feels staged. Isn't that the most brutal kind of heartbreak? To realize you weren't living in love, you were living in a performance. And then comes the most haunting part. What if the marriage was never meant to last? What if, from Meghan's perspective, it was always a contract with an expiration date? A stepping stone towards something bigger? Fame, power, independence? For Harry, the man who gave up his kingdom for her, the realization must have been soul-crushing. He walked away from everything for love. And yet love may have walked into his life already planning its exit. But here's where the cliffhanger emerges. Because as Harry stared at that date, as the truth seared into his mind, something else caught his eye. A detail buried deeper in the document. A note, a reference, a name scribbled in the margins. Proof that Meghan wasn't alone in this. Proof that someone else was involved in preparing this escape, long before Harry ever suspected. And when he saw that, the betrayal cut even deeper. Because it wasn't just about Meghan's plan. It was about the third party who knew, who helped, who stood in the shadows of his marriage before he even realized there were cracks. The vault was supposed to hold jewelry, velvet boxes, shimmering heirlooms, eternal promises encased in gold and diamonds. But after the shock of the divorce papers, Harry's eyes drifted further. Because tucked against the back wall, barely noticeable at first glance, there was something else. A folder. Plain. Ordinary. Out of place in a room built for treasures. It wasn't velvet. It wasn't polished. It was manila. Unremarkable, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in an office, not beside priceless jewels. And yet, there it was. A hidden folder. Waiting. Silent. Almost daring him to open it. Can you imagine that moment? Your heart already shattered by betrayal. And then, more. Always more. That folder didn't belong, and Harry knew it. Jewelry vaults are curated, intentional, selective. There is no clutter. So the very presence of a folder screamed importance. Meghan had hidden it there for a reason, and that reason couldn't have been innocent. Harry reached for it. His hands shook, his breath quickened, his pulse thundered in his ears. The folder felt heavier than paper should. He opened it, and inside, the truth unfolded piece by piece. These weren't just the divorce drafts. No, this was bigger. This was a collection. Letters, notes, maybe even financial statements. It was Meghan's private archive, her contingency plan, her insurance policy. And as Harry sifted through it, the weight of her duplicity bore down on him. Let's talk about what might have been in that folder. Financial records, accounts detailing assets, investments, hidden funds, correspondence with lawyers, outlining possible strategies, potential settlements. Perhaps even drafts of interviews, statements prepared in case she needed to sway the public narrative. Each page represented planning, foresight, calculation. And all of it hidden not in a drawer or a study, but in the vault, the most secure place she had access to. Doesn't that tell you everything? This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Now pause for a second. Think about the symbolism. Harry gave up his role, his family, his future as a working royal to protect Meghan. He traded centuries of tradition for what he thought was love. And yet here was a folder showing that Meghan might have been protecting herself all along. Not with love, not with loyalty, but with legal paperwork and financial strategy. Isn't that the cruelest irony? He sacrificed everything to keep her safe, and she may have been quietly safeguarding her independence from him. And then came the letters. Personal notes tucked between the official documents. Meghan's handwriting, recognizable, elegant, deliberate. Some pages read like journal entries. Others were clearly drafts of correspondence. One in particular stopped Harry cold. It wasn't just Meghan's voice. It mentioned someone else. Another name. A lawyer, perhaps. Or maybe a confidant. Someone Meghan trusted enough to bring into her secret. Imagine the sting of realizing that outsiders knew about these plans before he did. Outsiders who might have been helping her craft an exit strategy while he was still living in blind devotion. This is where the betrayal cuts even deeper. Because secrets are one thing, but shared secrets? That's humiliation. Meghan wasn't just considering her options in silence. She was collaborating, consulting, building a team behind Harry's back. And that folder proved it. Every piece of paper in it whispered the same truth. Meghan had been preparing for a future without Harry long before he ever suspected cracks in tea. Let's talk psychology again. Folders are deliberate. Divorce papers might be a one-off draft, shoved somewhere in haste. But a folder? That's collection. That's curation. That's long-term storage. Meghan wasn't thinking in moments. She was thinking in chapters. Each document was a step, a building block toward freedom. This wasn't just one bad day of doubts. This was strategy. And Harry, staring at that folder, must have realized he wasn't just facing betrayal. He was facing premeditation. Now, let's bring in the emotional weight. Imagine Harry flipping through page after page, his eyes burning, his mind spiraling. Financial statements that suggested she was preparing for independence. Legal notes that hinted at custody battles. Letters that betrayed conversations he never knew happened. With every sheet, the reality deepened. Meghan hadn't been stumbling her way through a difficult marriage. She had been paving her exit behind velvet curtains. And Harry? He was the last to know. Here's the irony. Meghan had spent years publicly painting herself as the one blindsided by royal cruelty, the one unprepared for palace life, the one left vulnerable. Yet here, in this folder, she appeared not as a victim but as a strategist. Ready, prepared, calculated. The image she sold to the public didn't align with the archive Harry now held in his hands. And that contradiction shattered him even more. Let me turn this to you, the audience. Have you ever found something that changed the way you saw a person forever? A hidden message? A secret text? An old photo? Imagine multiplying that by 1,000. Imagine discovering not one betrayal, but an entire curated file of them. Would you ever be able to look at that person the same way again? Or would every word, every smile, every promise replay in your mind with suspicion? That's what Harry faced in that vault. Not just betrayal, but proof, documented and filed. And here's the cruel twist. Among the letters, one in particular seemed to stand out. A letter Harry couldn't ignore. It was short, to the point, written in Meghan's unmistakable hand. And in it, she hinted at doubts, not about the royal family, not about the press, but about him. About Harry, his temper, his choices, his insecurities. The words cut deep, because it wasn't just about planning an exit. It was about questioning whether she had ever believed in him at all. Can you imagine how those words would echo in his mind? And as Harry placed the papers back into the folder, his hands shaking, his breath ragged, he realized something chilling. Divorce papers could be explained away. Doubts could be rationalized. But this folder? This wasn't a mistake. This was a system. A carefully constructed, meticulously hidden system designed to protect Meghan's future, even if it meant destroying his. And that's when Harry's heart sank to its lowest point. Because one of those letters mentioned a third party, a name, a person Harry knew, someone he trusted, or thought he did. And in that moment, betrayal wasn't just Meghan's. It was shared. It was spread. It was bigger than he ever imagined. Which left Harry with one burning, devastating question. Who else had been part of Meghan's secret plan from the very beginning? There it was. A letter. Not typed, not polished with a lawyer's sterile language, but handwritten. Meghan's handwriting. Elegant, slanted, deliberate. Harry recognized it instantly. He'd seen it on birthday cards, on little notes she left him on the kitchen counter, even on the pages of children's books she inscribed for Archie. But this letter wasn't a love note. It wasn't encouragement. It wasn't a sweet message from a wife to her husband. This letter shouldn't have existed at all. And yet, hidden deep inside that folder, it did. Picture Harry's face as he unfolded it. his eyes scanning each curve of her pen, searching for reassurance, for some sign that this wasn't what it appeared to be. But the deeper he read, the colder his blood ran. This wasn't a letter written for him. No, it was written about him. To someone else. A confidant. A collaborator. A person Meghan trusted enough to reveal her darkest doubts to. And what Harry read on that page cut him deeper than any tabloid headline ever could. Let's step inside that letter. It wasn't long. Just a page or two. But it didn't need to be lengthy to devastate. Meghan's words were concise, sharp, laced with undertones Harry had never seen directed at him before. She wrote about the struggles of palace life, yes. She wrote about the pressures of media, yes. But nestled between those complaints was something more personal. A confession of doubt. Not about the monarchy, not about the institution, but about Harry himself. About whether he was strong enough. About whether he was capable. About whether he was the man she needed him to be. Can you imagine that? Your wife, the woman you gave up your family for, the woman you stood by through fire and fury, secretly writing to someone else about her doubts in you? And not just doubts, but doubts documented, preserved, hidden away for safekeeping. The kind of doubts that could one day serve as justification for leaving. Isn't that the cruelest kind of betrayal? To weaponize words against the very man who fought the world for you? Let's analyze the psychology. Handwritten letters are intimate. Unlike emails or texts, they're deliberate, thoughtful. They require effort. Meghan didn't dash this off in a moment of anger. She sat down, pen in hand, and wrote carefully, which means every word was intentional, every sentence crafted. That makes the betrayal even sharper. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. She wanted this letter to exist. She wanted someone else to read it. And she wanted those doubts preserved in ink. Now let's ask the obvious. Who was this letter written to? That's the question that burned in Harry's mind as he read it. The way she phrased things, the level of detail, the confidence in her tone. It wasn't to a stranger. It wasn't to a random friend. No, this was someone she trusted implicitly. Perhaps a lawyer, laying the groundwork for separation. Perhaps a confidant like her mother, Doria. Or maybe a friend who had always been in her inner circle. Whoever it was, it meant one terrifying thing. Meghan wasn't alone in her doubts. Someone else knew. Someone else was part of the secret before Harry ever was. Let's add emotional weight here. Imagine reading lines like, "I'm not sure he understands what I need." Or, "Sometimes I wonder if he's truly capable of giving me the life I deserve." Those may not have been the exact words, but that was the tone. Sharp, doubtful, final. For Harry, who had given up his country, his titles, his brother, his father's trust, all for Meghan. Those words would have been like acid burning through his heart, because they didn't just question his choices. They questioned his very worth. And then came the cruelest irony. Meghan had often spoken in public about loyalty, about how Harry was her rock, her safe space. She painted him as her hero in interviews, gushed about his support. But behind closed doors, in her own hand, she was writing about her doubts. Two narratives, two voices, one for the world, one for the folder in the vault. Isn't that the sharpest contradiction? The Meghan the world saw versus the Meghan Harry had just discovered. Now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. This letter wasn't just about doubt. It was evidence. Evidence that Meghan had documented her feelings in a way that could later be used to justify divorce. Think about that. Letters like this aren't just musings. They're ammunition. If custody battles arose, if public opinion needed swaying, this letter could be produced as proof. See? I had doubts all along. I tried, but he wasn't enough. Doesn't that sound eerily strategic? Doesn't that sound like the kind of planning that belongs in a folder hidden in a vault? Here's where it gets darker. The letter mentioned specifics. Memories. Incidents that Meghan painted in a particular light. Harry recognized them immediately, but the way she described them didn't match his recollection. She twisted them, shaded them, turned moments of vulnerability into moments of weakness. Can you imagine how destabilizing that would feel? To realize your own life, your own memories, had been reframed by the woman you loved and preserved in ink to be used against you? And then, the name. A name appeared in the letter. Not Harry's. Someone else's. Someone Meghan had trusted enough to address these words to. Harry stared at it, his stomach lurching. This wasn't just Meghan's secret anymore. This was a shared conspiracy. Another person had known about her doubts, her plans, long before Harry ever opened that vault. And the betrayal doubled, because now it wasn't just his wife who had deceived him, it was someone else in his orbit. Someone who had smiled in his face while knowing his marriage was rotting from within. Let's turn this back to you. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were talking about you behind your back? That conversations were happening in shadows you weren't invited into? Multiply that by 1,000. Multiply it by the weight of marriage, children, and global scrutiny. That's the crushing realization Harry faced as he read that letter. His wife had doubted him, documented it, and shared it with someone else. And here's the final twist of this chapter. Letters aren't just about words. They're about permanence. Unlike spoken doubts, which vanish into the air, letters remain. They endure. They can be kept, hidden, weaponized. This letter, tucked away in that folder, wasn't meant to disappear. It was meant to wait. For the right time. For the right moment. For the day it could be unleashed. And Harry knew that. As he folded it back with shaking hands, as the ink seemed to burn into his eyes, he realized one devastating truth. Meghan hadn't just questioned him. She had prepared proof of those doubts. She had preserved them. She had made them permanent. But what tore him apart even more was the identity of the person on the other side of that letter. Because once Harry saw who Meghan had entrusted with her secret, he realized that this betrayal wasn't confined to the vault. It stretched into his wider world. And the name on that page would shatter the last of his trust. The third party. That was the revelation that pushed Harry from heartbreak into absolute devastation. Up until now, the betrayal had been between him and Meghan. A private fracture. A wound that, though deep, might have been something they could keep between them. But the moment Harry's eyes landed on that name in Meghan's letter, everything changed. Because suddenly, it wasn't just his wife who knew about these doubts, these drafts, these escape plans. Someone else had been brought in. Someone he recognized. Someone who had no business knowing more about his marriage than he did. Can you imagine that gut punch? Reading a letter where your spouse questions your worth, your strength, your role in their life, and then realizing she shared those doubts with someone else before ever sharing them with you? It's betrayal amplified, humiliation magnified. Harry wasn't just blindsided by Meghan. He was blindsided by the fact that another person, maybe more than one, had been allowed into the sacred circle of his marriage while he was left in the dark. Let's linger on that for a moment. Marriage is supposed to be between two people. Two hearts, two voices, two lives united. But here, in Meghan's own hand, was proof that a third party had been invited into their most intimate struggles. And not as a mediator, not as a counselor, but as a confidant in planning an exit. Doesn't that sound like conspiracy? Doesn't that sound like collusion? Now, who could this third party be? That's where speculation turns the knife even deeper. Was it a lawyer? If so, that means Meghan wasn't simply venting. She was strategizing. She was laying the groundwork for divorce, consulting someone with the power to turn her doubts into binding legal action. Was it a close friend? That would sting differently, because it would mean Meghan chose loyalty to that friend over loyalty to Harry. Or was it someone inside the royal-adjacent world, a figure like Tyler Perry, who had famously provided them refuge in the early days? Whoever it was, the implication was the same. Meghan had allies in her secret doubts, and Harry was the last to know. Let's turn to Harry's emotions in that moment. Imagine the heat rising in his face, the rage clashing with sorrow, the shame eating him alive. This wasn't just betrayal, it was exposure. Someone else out there carried his wife's private doubts about him. Someone else had read Meghan's words questioning his manhood, his capabilities, his role as a husband and father. And Harry, a man who had endured decades of humiliation in the public eye, was now humiliated in private in the cruelest way. Because what could cut deeper than realizing your flaws have been documented, preserved, and shared with outsiders? And here's the devastating irony. Meghan had built her public brand on the mantra of privacy. She raged against invasions of her private life. She fought the tabloids for spilling her secrets. Yet here she was, sharing the most intimate details of her marriage willingly with someone else. Can you see the contradiction? She preached privacy while practicing disclosure. Just not to the man who mattered most. This raises an even darker question. How much did this third party know? If they knew about the letter, did they also know about the folder? About the drafted divorce papers? About Meghan's long-term strategy? Imagine Harry realizing that his marriage might have been an open secret to people he thought were allies. That while he stood proudly, defending Meghan against family and press alike, others were quietly nodding along, already aware of her escape plan. That thought alone must have shattered him. Let's ask the audience directly. What would you do if you discovered not only that your spouse was doubting you, but that someone else knew before you did? Would you ever be able to look at either of them the same way again? Would you ever trust either of them again? Or would every smile, every handshake, every hug feel poisoned by the knowledge of their shared secret? Harry's mind must have raced through names, faces, moments. Who had Meghan been slipping away to call? Who had she been emailing under the cover of night? Who had smiled at him at dinner, knowing more about his marriage than he did? The paranoia alone would be enough to unravel anyone. Because once you know there's a third party, you can't stop asking. Who else? Was it one person? Two? A circle? And here's where it gets worse. The letter didn't just mention the name in passing. It carried a tone of intimacy, familiarity. Meghan trusted this person deeply. She confided in them. She shared her doubts with a confidence she hadn't even extended to her husband. That tone must have cut Harry like glass, because it proved that, in Meghan's mind, he wasn't her first confidant. He wasn't her safe place. Someone else held that role, and that realization can break even the strongest bond. The third party's involvement also changes the stakes. Divorce papers hidden in a vault could have been explained away as precaution. Letters of doubt could have been framed as personal journaling. But a third party? That turns everything into a network of betrayal. It proves Meghan's secrets weren't private musings. They were active collaborations. Plans shared, discussed, possibly even acted upon. And that is a different beast entirely. Now, let's add the emotional spike. Harry's hands clench. His chest tightens. The walls of the vault seem to close in. He imagines confronting Meghan, screaming the name at her, demanding answers. He imagines the denial, the spin, the tears. But he also imagines the smugness. The so what? The shrug of someone who knew she had the upper hand all along. And that vision terrifies him. Because it means the betrayal isn't just personal, it's strategic. It's power. And then comes the cliffhanger. Because in that moment, holding the letter, seeing the name, Harry realized something chilling. If Meghan was willing to share her doubts with someone else, what else had she shared? Were there other letters, other folders, other secrets floating out there in the world, tucked away in someone else's drawer, waiting to be revealed? The vault no longer felt like the only place holding Meghan's betrayals. The betrayal was bigger, wider, spilling out into the world beyond those walls. And Harry knew with sickening certainty, this third party wasn't just a confidant. They were a co-conspirator, and uncovering their role would shatter his marriage even further. The wedding. The day the world watched, the day Harry believed he was sealing forever with Meghan. A prince and his bride, millions of eyes glued to the spectacle, a ceremony dripping with symbolism, tradition, and romance. The carriage ride, the vows, the kiss, the music, it was presented as a modern fairy tale. But as Harry sat there in the vault with that folder, those letters, and those divorce drafts echoing in his mind, one thought burned through him like fire. Was the wedding ever real? Or was it staged from the very beginning? Imagine that realization sinking in. Every moment he had cherished suddenly felt suspect. The ring he slipped onto her finger, was it a sacred promise, or a prop in a performance? The vows whispered beneath stained glass windows, were they words of love, or carefully rehearsed lines in a script? The entire day, which Harry had treasured as proof that he had found his forever, now replayed in his head like a scene from a play. A production, a narrative carefully crafted for cameras, for headlines, for public consumption. And here's where the vault's contents took on a darker meaning. Those divorce papers and that hidden letter suggested one thing. Meghan may have walked down the aisle with an alternate narrative already in mind. To the world, it was a love story. To her, it might have been a stepping stone. Doesn't that send a shiver down your spine? That even as Harry poured his heart into the vows, Meghan may have already had her eyes on the exit door? Let's revisit the wedding through this new lens. The moment Meghan stepped out in that Givenchy dress, the press called it timeless. The crowd gasped. The veil embroidered with flowers from every Commonwealth nation was praised as symbolic, unifying, poetic. But in hindsight, could that veil have also been a mask? A curtain behind which a different story was being concealed? Isn't it possible that what the world saw as sincerity was actually strategy? And think about the choir singing Stand By Me, a song about loyalty, solidarity, unbreakable bonds. Harry believed it was their anthem, a promise in music. But now, looking back, how bitter must that memory feel? The irony of Meghan publicly choosing that song while privately drafting her departure. Loyalty sung for millions while disloyalty simmered in secret. That contradiction would gnaw at Harry until the end of his days. Let's dig deeper. Weddings are theater. Every choice, every gesture, every detail is staged for meaning. And Meghan, with her Hollywood background, understood performance better than anyone. Did Harry ever stop to wonder whether the wedding itself had been her biggest role? Whether the tears, the smiles, the perfectly timed glances were crafted for the cameras rather than for him? That's the chilling thought that must have tormented him as he sat in that vault. Had he mistaken acting for authenticity?